Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Regardless of whereabouts you're attending from in the world, a very warm welcome to our Quirkos webinar. If I haven't met you before, my name's Lynn Lavery. I'm the Director of Academic Consulting, and we are very delighted to be hosting Dr. Daniel Turner. So Daniel is the director of a UK-based company, Quirkos. And I was pondering this morning what the easiest way to explain Quirkos is, and I'm aware that at least 80%, probably more of the group, are currently using in vivo. So I think the simplest way to explain it is that Quirkos is a simpler and more budget-friendly version of in vivo. Some of you had a chance to see it at last year's Research Accelerator conference, and we're very excited by some of the functionality that it offered. And so I have been meaning all year to get in touch with Daniel to arrange a demonstration session for us so that you can properly see it and have Daniel run it through its paces. So I'm really delighted he was able to come along today to run one of our pre-conference webinars for Research Accelerator 2024, which Daniel is also speaking at. So that will be another great reason to sign up to this year's conference. So I am going to be behind the scenes today, folks. I will be dealing with questions in the chat and monitoring the live Q&A. If you have connected in and you're panicking about not having a microphone or a webcam, don't panic. That is what we would be expecting. So today's session is set up as a Zoom webinar, not a meeting. So you'll be able to see and hear Daniel and I, and you'll be able to interact with us in the chat in the live Q&A, but you don't need to worry about muting yourself or turning webcams off. Now, if you have a question today, and I have warned Daniel, there will likely be lots of really excellent questions. He's looking forward to answering them. So if you have a question, pop that into the Q&A panel for us. It's just a little bit easier to manage that way. And if you've just got any sort of general comments, we'll keep those in the chat. So I think that's all I need to say admin-wise. Daniel, I will hand over to you. I'm looking forward to seeing Quirkos today.
Thanks so much for inviting me again. And thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to show people around Quirkos. My background is from academia. Spent kind of 10 years as a postdoc doing various kinds of qualitative mixed methods projects. Quirkos came about a little bit because we wanted to do participatory analysis. We actually wanted to have people who were experts in their fields, but not necessarily experienced researchers, contribute to the interpretation of qualitative data in our project. And we just couldn't find a tool that really helped us to do that. And so left academia 10 years ago. 10 years ago last month, we released our first version of Quirkos. And it's just grown from there. Again, originally anticipated to be a participatory tool. I think the ease of use was something that just appealed to a lot of researchers that just wanted a tool that was very simple to learn and just kind of got out of the way so that they could, just use their brains and their own interpretation the best that they could. So that's kind of been our ethos kind of since then, to try and keep it simple and affordable and accessible. And so, yeah, I'm going to show you around today. Lynn has kindly offered to host the session, and if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat. I'll check in on them at various different points. And I'll stop at a couple of different places just to kind of see if there are any questions, anything that's not clear that you want me to go through at all. But today I'm going to go through kind of the basic operations of Quirkos, try and show you a couple of weird and wonderful things. I'm going to show you around some of the example data sets we have, because whether you end up using Quirkos or not, they can be really useful for just having some data to play with if you want to do that before you have your own qualitative data ready. We found it so hard to find qualitative projects which were open access, so we created a few. And then at the end, we'll look at some of the kind of exports and reports and some of the different resources we have, including the blog, which has got a great post which just put up last week about post-qualitative research. So we're dealing with all the kind of exciting new theoretical stuff, as well as the kind of nuts and bolts of doing analysis and collecting qualitative data too. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and show you around Quirkos. So first of all, it's worth noting that there are a couple of different ways that you can use Quirkos. I mean, the first point for any information is probably going to be the website. You just go to quirkos.com. There's lots of information there, lots of tutorials, lots of guides. And there's also, we've got an offline and an online version. And that means that you can either be working in your browser, or you can have an app that you install on your computer, and that allows you to work with offline data as well. So if your institution is worried about data protection and storing things in a cloud service, then there's no problem because we've got an offline app as well. And some of the differences between those different options are illustrated there as well. The offline version is a one-off fee. These are the student rates in US dollars, I'm afraid, not New Zealand ones. And there's for the cloud version is based on a monthly subscription. So you've also got the option about how best is going to fit in your project and your funding and so on. There is a 14-day free trial, so you can give it a shot and see if that's going to work out for you. I would definitely recommend if you're looking for qualitative software, you try the trials. Other software packages are available. There's NVivo and Atlas TI, which are soon to merge together as they've been bought out now. There's also tools like Deduce and Transana, MaxQDA, and free ones including Taget. So there's lots of different ones around. So give them a try, because I'll show you today might not be the right kind of tool for your kind of data or how you like to work with your data. So give them a try. I'm going to be using the web app today because our offline version, which is coming out next month, will now have the same interface finally. So it will look exactly the same, and that will kind of simplify things for a lot of people. And so all I have to do is just go on any browser on any device, quirkos.com/web, and then your data is always there. And the other advantage of the cloud service is that you could do live collaboration with people if you want to, and it's very easy to kind of share files and so on. But today I'm going to show you kind of step by step through using the sort of creating a project from scratch, bringing in your data, creating codes and themes, tagging things to those codes and themes, and then some of the ways to kind of explore and visualize the data. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just show you very quickly our example workshop project. So there's a link to this on the website, and I'm happy to share this with Lynn as well, so you can find it directly. But this is a real research project that we did a few years ago, which trainer Kathy did, interviewing qualitative researchers about their careers in qualitative research in academia. So it's a little bit meta, but it's a real research project, and we've done semi-structured interviews, and we've anonymized them, and we have permission to share them, the full transcripts, as well as all of the little kind of behind the scenes bits that you don't usually get to see, which I think is super helpful. So we've got our proposal, rationale, our call for participation, our ethics and risk assessment forms, all those things you have to do, but you never get to see from a paper. Here's the recruitment emails, consent forms, and then the semi-structured interview guide, summaries and field notes, as well as the actual transcripts and the actual data there as well. But the other thing that's super helpful is there are actually the coded project files. So you can see a Quirkos project file, and I'll show you this a little bit later, of at least how one person interpreted the data. So you can actually see how a finished analyzed research project looks. And that's super handy if you're wanting to try and just kind of get a sense, if you've not done qualitative analysis before, what a kind of, typical kind of thematic analysis, grounded theory type approach might look like once it's done. So those are the data sets I'm going to be working with today. I'm going to start out just with the transcripts. You can see here, there's a zip file which has everything in there. I've taken the liberty of downloading that and extracting that already. So all I need to do now is to create a new project in Quirkos, and I'm going to bring that data in there ready to analyze and interpret. So I'll click first here on the new project button, and we'll call this workshop. Is that what we're calling them? Not quite. Yeah, it's good enough. Probably spelled accelerator wrong. Um, so we've got our project. And this is the basic layout in Quirkos. The left side of the screen here is where we keep the codes and themes, and the right is where our sources of text are. So I'm going to start by bringing into the project the sources of data that we have. So these would be transcripts. We have them already transcribed. If you don't, we've got audio. We do have an automated transcription service now, which we host and run ourselves, so that it's completely offline. It doesn't share data with any third parties. It also has end-to-end encryption. That's an optional extra if you want more than the 100 free minutes. But it's really good with accents. It's really good with noisy cafe environments. And it could be a great help if you want to go from audio to your transcripts. But we've got the text already. So I'm going to go to add sources and then choose import here. And it'll just pop up here. Oh, it's got it already. To just select the files on your computer. You can see here, it already chose the qual interviews. Not that I did this earlier or anything like that. You can see I've got, these are Word files here. You can also bring in plain text or PDFs, or if you have your data in spreadsheet format, if you've got survey data, for example, you can bring that into Quirkos as well. I'm just going to choose these. I'm going to select all 7 to bring them in at once, because these are the Word files, which are the transcripts and semi-structured interviews, and you'll see those in a minute. So we'll bring those in. Pop, 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 pop. Great. So we've got 7 text sources brought in there. Okay. Because I'm streaming, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on the settings. I'm just going to make the text size a little bigger so it's easier for you to see. Okay, maybe that's a bit overkill. It's fine. Okay. So these tabs along this left column here, these represent the different sources that we've now copied into the project. So just by clicking through these, we can go through the different sources. There's a filter up here, so we want to quickly find, where's Bruce? Oh, it's right there. And if you want to filter by the properties, which I'll show you later, then you can quickly find in a sea of different sources that you might have in a larger project. This one only has 7, so it's not going to be too complicated today. But it might be useful to start grouping those sources, and it might be useful to tag things like the any kind of demographic data or metadata that we have about the sources, so we can kind of keep track of those. So I'm just going to click on this button here, which is the properties button. And this opens the properties view. In NVivo, if you're more familiar with NVivo, that would be called the attributes. And basically, this allows us to create any number of properties to describe our sources. And then later on, we can do subset analysis. We can categorize them and group them in all kinds of different ways. So a typical example, if we click to add a new property here, would be something like basic demographic information. So we might have one for age, okay, 44, 43. We can put those in as we go along. So we'll add a property for age, and then we'll tag Bruce as being 44, I guess. We'll add another property and we'll call location, New Zealand. But of course, this might be Upland or anywhere. So whatever you like. And there's no limit to the number of these properties that you can have. You can also use them for numeric or discrete categories like this. You can also use them for longer comments and memos. So if you wanted to have reflections, I often do this. Oops. So I might have something like this interview went really well. We went up to the conclusion. So if there's context I want to have attached to the interview, then I can put that in here as well. Oh, let's select a location. Bruce come from New Zealand. Um, so the other way that you would use the properties is to identify different types of data. So, so these might be, so these are interviews. So we might say some structured interviews. We may also have a project that also has focus groups. Oops. And another one which is survey results or something else like that. And that way we can analyze all of our data together, but always be able to see the results just from one type of data. So if we only want to see everything on a particular code or theme, which is from an interview, then we can very quickly filter that way, or everything from our focus groups, then we can quickly identify it that way. So that's a very basic kind of way that you can use this to explore the data. You can also use qualitative analysis software to do literature reviews and systematic reviews. Um, and if so, you can use these properties to tag things like details of the journal article. So it's a journal article, it's a textbook chapter, or it's a policy document. And you can tag the year and the authors and the journal and so on. And that's extremely useful. I'm a big fan of actually putting literature in the research project as well as my data, and differentiating it because I can tag it as a data type. I can have a data type which is journal article. And that way, it's really helpful for me when I come to write up. If I've interpreted the literature in the same way that I've interpreted my data. So if I'm using the same codes and themes across the literature review I've done as the data that I'm collecting, it's very quick for me to say, okay, this is what the established literature is saying, but this is what my research participants are saying on that same topic. And that way, when it comes to writing up, getting those quotes and doing that comparison to the wider literature is very easy to do. But that's entirely optional. And you could use these properties in any way that you like. And just we tab through these. We've got the option here to just keep going, adding new locations and editing this data. If you've got this kind of participant data already in a spreadsheet, you can import that straight up, and then where you don't have to do the manual kind of data entry for this. I don't have that data. In fact, I mean, I find it quite useful to actually use the software to manage that data itself. And I often use it for things like, do I have a consent form back from this person? So I can, sorry. So I can use that even if I don't have the data back. So I can create fields for my participants even before I've got their data. And that way I can keep track of things like participant numbers, whether I've got the consent form and what day the interview is going to be on or was on and so on. So you can use this as a data management tool as well. So I'm just going to click here at the top right to close the properties. So that's the basics about managing your sources of data, importing them into the project, and then using the properties to kind of define and sort them. I'll quickly check if there are any questions or if anybody had anything at this stage that wasn't clear or you want me to go over again.
That was so incredibly clear, Daniel. I don't think anyone would be saying that it was unclear,
Okay,
but um,
okay.
if anyone has questions, maybe pop that either in the chat or the Q&A quickly. I'm going to jump in and ask a question or two, if I may,
Mm.
Daniel. And wow, I'm really struck by just how fabulously simple that all is. I just think as researchers, we do have a bit of a tendency to overcomplicate things. And there's so much to be said for just bringing things down to basics, like knowing if you've got a consent form for a participant or not. And yeah, I love the fact that you can keep track of all that stuff in Quirkos. One question I had was, like you, I'm a huge fan of having my literature alongside my data, but I'm also aware that that can really blow project sizes out a bit. Is there any file size limit for a Quirkos project?
No, there isn't. It can, and so yeah, you can keep going. I mean, obviously, like anything, it starts to slow down if you've got a lot of literature and then you've got a lot of sources. Just things like the search will start to get a bit slower to get the results through.
Okay.
So it's worth bearing that in mind. But what you can do, and I'll share a little bit later, is you can have obviously you can save as, you can create copies of your projects, and you can merge projects together. So if you ever get to a stage where you want to keep separate projects for your literature and data, and then probably bring them together at the end, then you can do that with a merge project. So then you can bring your literature project and your own data project together. If you've got a very large survey and you've got a lot of interviews, again, you might just, for your own kind of sanity, because people might be talking about different things, and survey data is a lot of short snippets, and interviews will be a lot of in-depth stuff. Okay, yes, you want to use the same codes and the same coding framework, but you may just want to keep those projects separate, and you can do that and then merge them together at any time later. But of course, for the merged projects, the original projects aren't kind of absorbed, they're still kept. So even though you've merged the projects, you still have the originals to go back to. So you can merge all your data in one big project, and you can say, well, that's not useful right now. I'll go back to my separate projects and I can look at that, merge it later if I need to. So it's I mean, Lynn, you know this extremely well. I mean, it's experimenting and trying different things. And I think it's one of the things that software is very good at, is that you can always save another copy, have a play
Mhm.
around, merge a bunch of stuff together, decide it doesn't work. Okay, go back to the original one. It's a lot more flexible than paper and
Yeah.
kind of those kind of manual approaches in that kind of way. A lot easier to change your mind on stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I think that's just so helpful on a qualitative project where your thinking may well change and develop over time. And, if you put a pink highlight on something or you cut something out with a pair of scissors on paper data, you're stuck with it. But with software, you've got that flexibility to allow your thinking to develop and evolve, which I think is
Yeah,
fabulous.
yeah.
The other question I had, Daniel, and my initial version of this question you answered already. I was going to ask about whether or not you can import demographic characteristics, but you mentioned that that was possible if you had that sourced elsewhere, that you could bring it in. But I guess another question related to that would be if you are keeping track of demographics and participant records in Quirkos, are you able to export that record out?
Yes.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I'll very briefly show the export. I'll go into this a bit later, but you can export Excel spreadsheets back out.
Oh,
So,
fabulous.
oh, here, okay, great, here it is. So, okay, there's not very much in this project yet, but here's the name of the title, which we didn't change, who brought it into the project and when, and here's the demographics in a table. So we've got the age, but we only did it for two people, and the location and the notes and the data consent form. And there's the text of that source as well if you need that. So then once you have that in Excel, you can obviously rearrange it and delete any columns that you don't want. And yeah, you've got that data there for your kind of for a code book, which we'll look at later, but also yeah, your kind of table of participants.
Wonderful. That's excellent. Thank you. I'll stop interrupting you now and let you get on with the demo.
No, no, anytime, anytime. Thank you. Those are good questions. Right. Um, so we brought the data in, but that's kind of the boring part of it. So let's look at some codes and coding and other ways that we can kind of analyze and interpret and annotate the data. So obviously you might take different qualitative analysis approaches here. So you might do something like classical grounded theory, you might do thematic analysis, you might do framework analysis where you have pre-existing code set. You may take an approach like in vivo coding or IPA that takes a line-by-line approach. And Quirkos tries to be flexible enough to let you do those different things and all the different liminal spaces between those. And I'll briefly kind of go through how you would do those kind of things. I'm going to assume that for kind of most people, you're taking a kind of emergent grounded theory, thematic analysis kind of approach. That's basically what I'm going to demonstrate most of here, with a couple of signposts to some of the other ways that you might play with the data. So, so this is my favorite thing to do oh God, let's not take this source. Sorry. Right. Okay. Okay, I did that source with a workshop last week, and the first sentence, the person just goes on and on and on. But I'm just going to choose one sentence and see how many codes and themes I can find for it. So, okay, so the interviewer asks, there we go. So, Bruce, have you always been in research and academia, or have you got another life? Laughs. No, so I guess I've been in academia to varying degrees most of my professional life. It's the few odd years where I worked outside of educational institutions has really been in sort of quasi-academic capacities, I guess. Well, this is a long sentence as well, isn't it? Insofar as pursuing activities I was doing at universities, research and development, I guess application. Okay. Right. Well, there's actually quite a lot of interesting stuff. I'm going to break up this sentence a little. I'm not going to do the whole sentence at once. So let's look at this stuff. I guess I've been in academia to varying degrees most of my professional life. Okay. So what can I see in this? Well, I see it's about academia, varying degrees. So some kind of variation, vagueness. Most of a professional life, kind of, okay, well, what's outside of professional life? Was there the training as well? Okay, I'm interested in that. Few odd years outside. Okay, but let's look at that one sentence. And what I want to do is I want to create some codes or themes, probably codes at this stage, to kind of represent the interesting things that I'm seeing in this data. And so all I need to do is click and drag to select a piece of text I think is interesting. And then I'm going to drag and drop that onto an empty space on the left. That's all empty space right now. And that will create a new code at that place, which I'm going to call this one academia, which will have that text already in it. Now there's a space here also for a longer description. So if it's not clear what we mean by a short title, we can put that description in there later. Working, yeah, I guess working in, it's fairly self-explanatory, but some other things might not be. I don't know what Anuja's talk is going to be at the Research Accelerator thing next week, but she's got a big thing. She made us add emojis. So you can code with emojis. You can add emojis in here. There's a school, I guess. Okay, so yeah, there are various different ways that you can express your codes and themes. You can also choose colors for them. There's a set of default colors here. You can also choose lots of different shades of things. So maybe everything in academia is going to be different shades of blue, kind of like an academic-y kind of color. I don't know. So let's do that. And so now what we've got is a bubble here. We hover our mouse over it, it gives us a bit more information about it. And that bubble represents a code, which is academia, and it has this section of text here in it. And we can see there's a little color-coded stripe here that says academia. So we've tagged this piece of text to be about academia. It's about other stuff as well. So let's keep that same piece of text and drag and drop it somewhere else. And we'll create another one called vagueness. That's a terrible name for a code, but for now it'll do. When people are being deliberately obtuse, I don't know, maybe. That's a theme that might evolve, but I kind of want to capture that. Okay, orange is fine. And so now what we can see, if we go away, so we've got now two these coding stripes. You've got a very similar thing in NVivo. And we've tagged that this piece of text is about vagueness, or is vague, probably would have been better. Okay, let's go and let's call this vague. or vague statements. I don't know. So we can obviously change our mind about what those mean. We just right click, choose the edit there. And you can see here with these stripes here that we've assigned one piece of text to two codes. And we can add as many different codes to one piece of text as we like. They also mentioned the phrase professional life, so let's do that too. And you can easily see how you can get carried away creating loads and loads of codes and bubbles. This is about their professional life too, so we'll drag and drop it there. And now you'll see that the more you add something to one of the codes, the more it grows. So the size of the bubbles in Quirkos is always giving you a sense of what's emerging from your codes and themes. Now, by default, you can turn this on. There's no numbering. So it doesn't show you how many quotes you've assigned to each of those codes. It just gives you this relative size as a kind of indicator. It's one of the ways that Quirkos is designed to try to get you not to quantify your data too much, or at least rely on that quantification and always go back to read the data. So if we now double click on if we hover the mouse over it, it shows us the number 3. So, okay, we've got 3 pieces of code on professional life. And if we double click on that, it will now show us all of the text statements that we have assigned to that code. And so this is everything that we have from professional life. And it's these 3 bits of text I randomly put from Bruce right now, which is not super exciting, but there we go. And this is what it's trying to do, trying to get you to go back to the text. If you click on here, it will take you back to that section of the text. So you can see in context where that was. And when you click here, you can select these quotes and you can copy and paste them wherever you're writing up. And that's obviously one of the key things that you want to do with qualitative software, is use it to manage your quotes and codes so that when you're writing up and you've got your Word document or wherever you're writing your thesis, you've got your section about professional life, we can paste in those quotes. So they come in with the attribution of which source they came from. So we should have changed the name. But yeah, here are the 3 quotes we have. They're all from Bruce about professional development. So again, the software is trying to get you to always be qualitative and keep being qualitative and going back and reading that text. So reading across the sources now and within the code. What is everybody saying about professional life? And when we start to kind of drill down onto that one code or theme, how is that helping us to interpret the data in a different way? So I'm just going to click on the home button here again. We'll just look at some of the other ways that we can play with these codes and themes. So we can drag and drop and move these around. And we'll see later, this can be quite an important way to help us kind of manage things. I tend to put things which are similar, kind of close together. Helps me, my thought process also helps me just keep track of stuff. So this is kind of more of a kind of meta category, but this is all about work. If we want to create a code, even before we've got some text for it, we can just right click on an empty space and choose the new Quirk button. And what we can put in here is, okay, so let's say, it's kind of a professional thing, but it doesn't really fit neatly into academia and professional life. Or maybe we also have things like teaching, or research. But what we can also do with these codes is drag and drop them on top of each other to create subcategories. So within academia, we may have research and teaching and training. And those are all kind of, not really aspects of academia, but kind of things that we find in academia. And it may be the case, particularly as we start having lots of codes and themes, that we want to put them on top of each other like this to create these subcategories. And now if I double click on one of these, it will show us this hierarchy that we have of academia at the top, and then these subcategories pulled out: training, teaching, and research, where we didn't code anything yet, so we were a bit lazy. But we can recode in here as well. So if we started out with loads and loads of quotes just generally about academia, but then decided, okay, well, we need to be a bit more specific about what we mean about those different aspects of academia, we could drag and drop them onto these codes here. So we can add this to training, and we can add it to, maybe it's also about research, or maybe it is in this case, but anyway, that's fine. So we can use this view also to kind of subcode. And we can also drag and drop onto any of these other codes here. So if we decide at any point, oh, okay, that should be about something else, then we can easily do that. I'll just click on the home button to go back to the main view. If you want to have a more kind of conventional view, you can click this button here and you've got the list view. And this is a lot more like the kind of list hierarchy that you get in NVivo or Atlas TI or MaxQDA or any of those other software packages. Indented here a little bit to show the kind of subcategories. But again, you can just drag and drop and move these around, and they work in the same way. So you just drag and drop to add text to them. Again, it's easy to choose which way you want to go. If you want to keep this, you can also have this put in alphabetical orders and in a neat grid and all that sort of thing. But most of the time, people tend to like this kind of view in Quirkos and kind of stick with this kind of view. You can zoom in and out. You can do a search in here when you start to get lots of different codes, so you can kind of quickly filter to see the ones that you want. And basically, it's a fun way to kind of start playing and exploring with the codes and themes, which is obviously such a big part of working with the data. What I'm going to show you next is basically what this will look like once we've done a lot more work than we've got time to do live in this session today. But before we do that, I just want to show two other things, which are about not coding the data. So, for example, we've got this facility here for memos. Just make this a bit wider here. And instead of creating codes, we can also attach little memos to any section of the text. So we can drag and drop this piece of text here, not into a code, but onto the memo column here, any of this space here, and that'll create a new little kind of like a post-it note in the margin, basically. And they say my main research area, well, my main research discipline is linguistics. So what do they mean by main? Okay, so there might be something confusing in the data that we want to come back to. We might want to use this view here for doing in vivo coding or IPA, like a line-by-line type approach, and then create codes later. We also may want to use this. It's super helpful if we're collaborating with people, lots of people are working on a project. We can use this to kind of chat and have kind of conversations about the data. Whenever we select this text, select the memo, it selects the text. So we can then drag and drop that, let's put that in the vague statements, I think, onto some of the codes as well. So we can also do coding. Another way that we can annotate the project, not necessarily specifically a piece of text, is what kind of started out as the chat function in Quirkos. So there is a live chat built in, which is super helpful if you're doing live collaboration with people and you just want to say stuff like, do you know of this code? We think of a better name. But it's also available even if you're working offline and you're working by yourself, because it's really useful to use as a research log. So just to keep track of decisions that you make, it's all time stamped and date stamped when it comes to a different day. So, and again, you can export this as an Excel table. So you can have your research diary be very easy to kind of integrate into your research and keep putting in little notes or long notes if you want, but then having it right next to your data, but also exportable somewhere separately if you want to use that to look at later or as an appendix or something. Okay, yes, and of course you can put emojis in here as well, which is the most important thing. Okay. Sorry, Nuja would be very upset if I didn't mention the emojis. So what I'm going to do now is show you a little bit more of the operations that you do once you've done a bit more coding and interpretation. And to do that, I'm just going to open up the project when the coding has been finished. So I mentioned before that one of the things we have for these example projects is these completed projects. actually there's several. So the first pass iterative coding, and then there's different versions of it basically. We have these as QDPX files as well. And that means that you can import these into any software package, not just Quirkos. You can bring it into Atlas DVI, NVivo, MaxQDA, Deduce, any of the tools that support this is the standard interchange format for qualitative software projects. So I've got this downloaded already. So I'm just going to search in here. Yeah, let's take that one. Okay, right. So this is a bit more exciting. Um, so this was Kathy's interpretation of the data. All I will say is that it's always weird looking at someone else's coding framework. But I know that the colors mean things to her, where she's put things mean things to her, and how she's kind of created groups and subcategories, a part of her kind of cognitive process. Um, so it's always great seeing, and because I do a lot of this of training, I get to see a lot of people's codes and their coding frameworks, and it's really interesting how people use the space in Quirkos in different ways. They may have things in a grid or in quadrants, or everything's up in one corner, or everything's on top of one code, or everything is very colorful in a kind of spread rainbow. So the canvas area here gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of move things around, to play in different ways. But it does mean that sometimes for other people it's a bit weird going into it. So this might look very messy to you. It's one about messy journeys there. But I can assure you that to Kathy this makes a lot of sense. And you can see now she's got memos here, coded this as process earlier, but it's less about distinction between different phases of the process and more about learning to access people appropriately. Okay. And you can see there's lots of codes and coding here. It's where they first did their first qualitative research. It's about researching. It's about they're expressing vulnerabilities here, and a challenge to research and the researcher. And so now, of course, these themes have become a lot more interesting. And if we double click on messy journeys, for example, the really common way that people kind of talked about their qualitative journey was that it was not very direct. Most people did some mixed methods or didn't initially set out to be a qualitative researcher. So here are all the quotes about messy journeys. And was that because it was how their research is funded? Well, we can click and see those different codes, but something like a big code like this now has all of these different quotes from across the different sources: David, Caroline, Jackie, and so on. And so now we can read about everybody's messy journeys and see what kind of commonalities and differences there are in our participants' responses. So that's one way that we can start reading the data. We can start reading what people said. We can start reading across the codes or themes. But then we can also use those properties, those demographic data or any other data we have to read just a subset of the data. So what if we want to see if there are differences between groups of our participants? Well, now that we've got all these properties data, things in this project, we've got gender and location and the academic discipline and so on. Let's see if we can find some differences here. I'm going to show you something that, yeah, okay. It might not be surprising, but anyway, let's look here by location. So this is the filter view here, and this allows us to filter and see results just from any particular part of the project. So that might be if we've got multiple people working on the project, what work different people did. We can also look at stuff by date, by just from one name, questions if we're looking at survey data and so on. But here underneath these are the demographic information. So let's look by location. So we choose location as our filter criteria. And then we've got England, Scotland, and Australia. So let's look at England. Sorry, there isn't a New Zealand cohort in this project. I feel bad already. We'll look for training gap, and we click there and we see there are 22 quotes from our participants in England, and this is everything that they said about training gap. So now we're reading a subset of our data, talking about a particular thing. And so it could be really interesting to see what people in one location say about the training gap. But, surprise, surprise, let's do a comparison. So we can split this view in half, and we can see two of these queries at once, and that's super handy sometimes. So on this side of the screen, this is going to get, I'm sorry, this is going to get really small, so I can stream it and fit it on the screen. We choose location and Scotland. Let's choose England. More people there, fortunately. And oh, we did England twice, or Australia. That's what we're trying to do. Right. So this is one of the things that came out of this project. Um, there's a large quantitative difference in the number of times that our participants in England talked about the training gap compared to the participants in Australia. And this comes up, it's very, very visual, very obvious. But that's not what we want our finding to be, because just because somebody has mentioned something a lot, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's significant. So in this view, what we can do is we can read the difference. We can read what people in England said about the training gap, and we can read what people said in Australia about the training gap. And what we find when we do that is that in England, there's a perceived very large training gap around qualitative research, but it's much, much less in Australia. At least the people that we spoke to in the Australian cohort did not have as much problem finding training for qualitative methods and qualitative analysis than the cohort that we spoke to in England. And so that was one of the things that going back and doing a qualitative read from the text showed us the difference and doing this subset analysis. Now we can add any kind of thing and any number of criteria here. So you can go as deep dive into this as you like. So if you want just the, people in England who were in sociology and were at an early career stage, then you can look for that. Okay, there was no one who meets all those criteria in this data set. But you can build these up in any kind of way you like. You can also use this just to focus on one particular source. So if you just wanted to see everything that was coded to Roger, so everything that Roger said on a particular thing next to in this view, everything that Jackie said, and we can do that as well. And let's see. So maybe Roger's talking a lot more about students being difficult. Yeah. So yeah, we'll go back and explore. And this is a tool that helps us kind of explore the data in different ways, visualize it, but also come back and read in different ways. And that kind of comparative reading, I think, is really important. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to show is some of the kind of the visualizations and then the exports. And there'll be plenty of time for questions after that. But I've shown you quite a lot. I've shown you the filters. I've shown you kind of a fully coded project. I've also showed you the codes and annotations and memos. So if you do have any questions, yeah, let's take a quick break for questions.
Wow.
Sorry, that was quite a lot I've covered. Sorry.
No, it was really, really clear, Daniel. My wow was just, I love so many things about that I've run out of space to jot them all down. Yeah, so many useful functions there. There have been a couple of questions. So Selena has asked, can you save different versions of your coding template, i.e. the codes and themes may develop over time? And I think you've answered the second part of her question, which is whether Quirkos can capture the thought process in coding development. So it's really around capturing the changes in your thinking over time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, so I do recommend that you always do the save as and create kind of snapshots at different places. So you've got an older version to go back to, not just so you can see the development, but if you change your mind on something, you can go back and have that later version. But also within the filter view, Quirkos is obviously capturing a lot of this stuff all the time. So you might want the history of when you created a particular code. Um, and so who created it, but then the date of who where's the quirk date? So yeah, so this will allow you to filter by the date. And then you can see, I'm not going to have any, this was done years ago, but you can see everything within the date range. So you can see stuff that you created early on, so early codes, early themes. What's kind of interesting is what I didn't show you, which is interesting for capturing as well, is that as well as being able to put codes on top of each other, there are also, you can create these groups of codes, and groups are kind of non-hierarchical groups.
Oh,
And in
nice.
here, we've got transcript summary groups, messy issues. So messy issues is a group which Kathy's created. I want to see what that is actually. I don't think I've looked at that one. So these are the codes that she describes as messy issues. So it's it's a group of more than one code. So all these things are messy issues for her, even stories and vulnerabilities. Okay, great. But what she's also done here is she's created a group for when she for which source originally suggested that code to her, if that makes any sense. So
Mhm.
first past Danny. So when she was reading through Danny's source, okay, there was nothing. Anything going to be here? Okay. But so what codes did she create when she was reading Bruce's source? What codes did she create when she was using Caroline's source? And she tagged that as well because she wanted to be able to come back later, so it's her first pass coding, and see which codes have been created from which person's transcript. Because that can have a kind of prejudice is not the right kind of word, but it has an influence, like the order that you interpret stuff, right? If you create a code called messy journeys, this phrase messy journeys was used by one of the participants. That's an in vivo code. I can't remember where
Mm.
it came from off the top of my head. But if someone else had said non-linear, that might have been the code that we used. And so sometimes it is, just as that question asked, like we need to capture that stuff. We need to capture that process sometimes. Capturing which code did we create that for? Whose words were that? Can be an important part of kind of understanding our interpretation process. Another way, of course, to capture that is in the chat. Keeping track of that just by kind of like writing notes to yourself as you're kind of going along as well. Yeah, so I hope that's answered some of that. But that's a really good question. It's a really good thing
Yeah.
to try and capture as you go along.
Yeah, I think that has answered that really well, Daniel. And I also really liked when you showed the list view of the codes, the fact that the description actually showed, because that's something that you don't see in other software so much. So I really like the fact that if you have entered those descriptions in, it's right on screen for you, which I think is really, really beneficial. So yeah, that's super exciting. Now, Joe has also asked a question that I'm pretty sure I know how you're going to answer. She's asked if you can import an existing in vivo project into Quirkos.
So you can't import the in vivo project because that's proprietary. But if you're in vivo, you can export it as a QDPX project, the REFI QDA exchange standard, and that you can import into Quirkos.
And that's the
So
answer, I
that's
thought.
the way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Joe, that's something I can give you a hand with if needed. Okay. Uh, One other quick question, Daniel, from me, and this might be more of a comment than a question. I picked up when you said about line by line coding and the ability to do that in that memo pane. There's been quite a lot of chat in our research accelerator community over the last couple of weeks about the difficulties of doing line by line coding in vivo. You end up with this proliferation of codes and it becomes really overwhelming and difficult to manage. And most experienced grounded theory folk that I know, or people that follow a thematic analysis approach that uses line by line coding, typically do that outside in vivo and then they come into the
Mm,
software at a later stage. But
mm.
if I've understood you correctly, Daniel, it looks like you could very successfully do line by line coding here in Quirkos. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's how you like to do it or not is really a matter of taste. So I won't say you can do that approach just the way you want to, but yeah, you don't have to. Um, in Aviva, you kind of have to create, yeah, like a code for each line. And the idea with the memos is that probably the first time through that you'll do the memos, you won't create any codes, or maybe a couple if there's stuff that's super obvious. But yeah, I will go through, okay, trained as a probation officer. So I might call this the first job. Oops, sorry. And then the next one I might be, so I did that for a few years and I moved to teaching. They did teaching. Okay, I'm doing really sorry, really pedantic, really stupid line by line coding. But there we go. They did training. Okay, you'll pull something a lot more interesting out of this. Community involvement was crucial. Um, ah, Sorry, I'm terrible at typing and speaking. Okay. Um, and then yes, you'll go through and you'll do that for all the whole source of all the sources, and then you'll come back later having done that, read those memos. There's a view I'll show you later where you just get the memos, just the text of the memos, and then you code from this. So they did training. Okay, right. So now there's a code. Gosh, there's got to be one here for training, isn't there? No, there isn't. Oh my gosh. Okay, fine. Well, I'll create a new. Now I'll create a code, and I'll drag and drop that onto the training one because I know that that's going to be something that people. Whoops, it entered twice, and then I can start building maybe the codes, maybe the themes from there. So that was the idea with this kind of approach. So it's different. It's not perfect, but it can help that. I find that really useful for that kind of approach and that kind of interpretation step.
Yeah, that's amazing. Awesome. Now, I'm conscious I have waylaid you a few times with questions, Daniel. You're okay to go a bit past the hour
If
I
that's okay for you,
Yeah, that's okay
yeah.
for
So
us. I was just going to say, if anyone does need to head off to another meeting, I have triple checked and I am definitely recording the session. So if anyone needs to race off at 10 o'clock New
sorry.
Zealand time, the recording is still going. But I think we'd love to have you show us a few more things if you've got the time, Daniel.
Yeah, I'll very briefly just spend a few minutes to show you some of the outputs. You can have lots of time to explore that with the training resources as well. But it's just good to get a feel of what comes out. The first thing that I always show is the word export. I think a lot of people coming to qualitative software for the first time, it's quite a good kind of comfort level to have these. So basically this creates, after you've done your coding, a Word document with here we go, with the annotations that you've done, the color-coded animations just in the memos in Word. So you've got standard Word document, you print out again, it looks just like you've gone through it with highlighters. So if you ever want to go back to that paper view, you can do that, and you've not lost that kind of approach. The other one, which I showed briefly, I'll go into a little bit more, is the Excel spreadsheet export. So now this is the coded project. And in here, you've got different workbooks which show you the different parts of the data. This is going to be very messy to see on the screen, but basically what you've got here is lots of different ways of exploring the data in the project. Particularly if you wanted to do more visualizations, create tables from it. or if you wanted to do statistical analysis. Quirkos doesn't have any tools for statistical analysis. Our philosophy is you do that in dedicated stats software where you can control the parameters just in the right way. So you can use this and bring this into SPSS or R or Excel and do that here. So we've got, here is our table of the sources and all those demographic data. Here's all the quotes and who they came from across the whole project. Um, yeah, there they are. Um, here are the codes. This is the coding framework. So these are the names of all the codes, what their parent was, the description, who created them and when, how many times they were used in each different source. In Danny, this code was used 2 out of 78 times. All the information you could want. The memos. So the memos with their associated text and what text and the yeah, gosh, you even got what the participant characteristics for each of those. And then you've got the chat export here as well. So it's very easy to get from this into a table or whatever other kind of format you want. The main thing that people use is the report. And that's basically kind of similar to the kind of style of report that you get in other software packages like NVivo. It's basically very comprehensive tables of all the different types of data. So here are all the sources. Here's when they were put in, how long they are in characters, and how many quotes there are from each one, which is kind of useful. And then here's our coding framework, how many times each code was used. And then we've got the right next to it that description again, who brought it in, who created that code and when. We've got graphs of the properties. So this is our the gender breakdown of our someone's not been mentioned. No, someone's not been tagged there, have they? Of the properties, sorry. And then we've got visualizations of the bubbles and the relationships to each other, and then the text kind of sorted by theme. And there's lots of different ways you can customize this, save it as a Word file or as a PDF to print out. And most people will use this as an appendix or to share with a supervisor or co-author or so on. So those are the main kind of exports. Then you can kind of export to the Refi QDA standard if you want to bring the data into different software. And yeah, that's basically everything I was going to go over today. But I am happy to stick around if other people want questions or if they want me to show anything that I kind of missed.
I absolutely love that report, Daniel, because one of the questions I get often is around, a student might have used NVivo, but their supervisor doesn't know the software. And while you can export out some individual reports from NVivo, I like the fact that someone could actually just export that one report out, and that would be an amazing thing to share with a supervisor to show your work and doesn't require them getting their head around another piece of software. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's, yeah, really great. I think the questions that came in have all been answered, but just for those of you that still are here, last chance to ask Daniel any questions that you'd like. And what we'll do is if you don't have any questions, pop that in the chat to let Daniel and I know, because then we can let Daniel get on with his evening, because of course it is 9 o'clock in the evening over there for Daniel. So if you've got any questions, either pop them in the chat or just let us know that you're all good in terms of what you've picked up today.
We'll put
And
my email address there as well. So if you want to email me with any questions, then feel free and happy to run workshops and demos like this for teams or groups. So just let me know if you've got any interest.
that's fabulous. And yeah, the feedback in the chat, Daniel, has been amazing. Everyone loves it. And there's some really, really, yeah, really great comments. I might actually export the chat and send it through to you.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I can't wait to try it myself. There were so many different components of that I just adored. And I don't have a very good poker face, so people probably could tell which features I particularly liked as we went through. But yeah, I think I love the simplicity. I love the visuals. I loved how easy it was to do things like bringing in attributes and the different ways you could use the properties. And yeah, just awesome, awesome stuff. I'm going to have a play with it myself. Now, folks, just a reminder that Daniel is one of our fabulous speakers at Research Accelerator 2024 next week. So we've got you on the Friday, I think, Daniel, haven't we? Thursday, your time.
Yes, Thursday our time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a bit of a collaboration day on the Friday. So we've got Daniel talking about collaborating in a qualitative team. We've got John Parsons talking about collaborating with your supervisor. And then Anuja and I, Daniel mentioned Anuja in his presentation today, are going to be talking about sort of networking and building connections with other researchers. And one of the examples Anuja shared, actually, Daniel, was how she reached out to you about the possibility of including emojis in your software. And look how
There you
that
go.
worked out.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's an excellent example of collaboration and connection, I think.
yeah. Yeah, I'm really
Fabulous.
looking forward to a bunch of those sessions too. And thank you again so much for inviting me along today.
Oh, look, thank you, Daniel. I enjoyed that enormously, and I can tell that everyone in the group did as well. It was beautifully presented, really, really clear. And I feel like, just even based on that demo, folk could go away and play around and actually get started with Quirkos, which I think is testament to what you've done with the software. So thank you very, very much.